Damon Martin, MMA fighting hero, one of the top coaches in all of mixed martial arts, and he is in deep preparation with the UFC heavyweight champion of the world, Francis Ngannou, as he gets ready to defend his title at UFC 270 against Ciryl Gane. Welcome back today. One of my favorite people to talk to, Coach Eric Nicksick. Coach, how are you?
I'm doing well, Damon. How are you?
I'm fantastic, man. Thank you so much for taking the time for me as always. I know you guys are always incredibly busy in Las Vegas. I even saw on Instagram you were training on Christmas Day.
Yeah, man. It never stops. So that's the coaching life for us. And, it is what it is.
Now, whose idea was that? Whose idea was to come in on Christmas Day and train? Because I saw you had a crew there. It wasn't just like you and one other person. You had a whole crew there.
It's definitely mine. I told the wife, I said, we'll get up early. We'll open up some gifts with the kids. And then I usually do like a prime rib dinner. So I was like, let me get the training out. We'll open up gifts. We'll get the training out of the way and I'll come back home and I'll start cooking. So she was cool with that, but she understands, the wife understands the process better than anybody. So when you have her on your side, everything's going to be all right.
Yeah, I imagine that I always joke with fighters, when you have to fight around a holiday, it can be tough because you want to enjoy family, you want to enjoy some food. When you got a fight coming up, a lot of that kind of goes away, especially if you're weight cutting, things like that. I guess as a coach, you don't really get a lot of holidays off ever.
Yeah, there's really no days off. There's no off season. You try to plan for that stuff ahead. And, I've been trying to do better at that because, Henry Hooft and, Teddy Atlas, guys that I look up to have always sat me down and like, look, you have to put time aside and it's non-refundable. Like you don't, if your fighter has a fight that weekend, sorry, I'm going out of town with my wife. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I still really haven't lived up to that quite yet. But, there's been a few times where, I've been able to get on these family vacations and stuff because, that's the most important thing is reinvesting back in the family when you spend so much time with your fighters.
Absolutely. Well, Coach, there's a lot I want to talk to you about, but let's kick things off and talk about the fight I just mentioned at the top there. Of course, Francis Ngannou getting ready to come back to action to defend his title against Ciryl Gane. Of course, we talked after the big win over Stipe Miocic. We didn't at that point. We thought it was going to be Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis. Ends up being Ciryl Gane. When did this camp actually start? Because you've known this has been the fight for a while, but I imagine even though I know Francis is training probably anytime he's at home he's training. But when do you actually start a camp? Because you've known this has been pretty much the fight since August.
Yeah, when after the Stipe fight, he came back home from Cameroon and we actually started camp. Assuming we were fighting Derek Lewis in September. So we were actually really deep into camp. And then they decided to make it Ciryl Gane and Derek Lewis for August card. So Francis actually went back to Cameroon for about a month or so. So we had a little bit of a break and then right back into it. The nice thing is that Francis didn't take a whole lot of time to like get back into like that shape again, get back into camp shape, if you will. So I feel like a lot of times fighters will get out of camp and then it takes them, they use that 8-week training camp to get into shape. I don't like that. I want you to come into camp ready to go in shape. And that's what Francis was able to do. So we had almost about a 12-week camp, So when he got home, we were able to start getting the ball rolling and getting in shape. So when the 8 weeks hit, we were already ready to go.
Yeah, I know we've had this conversation a couple of times as Francis was getting into title contention. And of course, after him becoming champion, is the evolution of what we've seen out of his game. And we saw it in the Stipe Miocic fight when he stuffed those takedowns. Immediately, people were like, "Ooh, Francis has got some wrestling now." And I know you joked with me and told me before, Francis is actually embracing wrestling. He's embracing some of the things that he never really embraced before. Have you seen that even in this camp? Seeing continued growth of Francis, which is kind of scary considering he's already the best heavyweight in the world, but he's still growing and evolving in the gym every day, I imagine.
Very much so. And I think it's his situational awareness and his shot selection, if you will. Like he's not shooting random shots just to shoot them. Like he's understanding where to fit in the right places, how to occupy the hands when he throws punches. You're going to get a reaction. When Francis Ngannou throws heavy punches, you're going to get a reaction of hands getting high. And so we're able to kind of dictate when we get the reactions that we want on what level changes we want to attack. So now he's starting to piece those things together. And it's the moments where it's not like it's a la carte where all of a sudden he's boxing and all of a sudden he's trying to wrestle. He's blending everything from the feet to the floor. And I think that's what's very important, especially at the highest level.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. An argument could be made that while the Derek Lewis fight was maybe a little bit of revenge because of their last fight, let's be honest, coach, it was not a great fight. I don't think anyone would ever say it was a great fight. There's two guys with a lot of power who didn't want to engage because, again, you play that game, you're just basically playing with dynamite. But I got to be honest, and this is not a dig on Derek Lewis whatsoever because we know what Derek Lewis brings to the game. But I think an argument can be made that Ciryl Gane is a much more dangerous fight. His movement, his speed, and you pack in that he does have power. He does have heavyweight legit power. Without, again, not taking a knock at Derek or anybody else, but would you agree and say that Ciryl Gane is actually probably one of the toughest matchups in this division?
Oh, 100%. I think it's just kind of that new puzzle, if you will. Like, when you watch Wonder Boy hit the division, you're like, oh, how's anybody going to beat this guy? And it's going to take a while to really understand him. It's like that in football, you get that new offense, the pistol comes out. Well, how do we stop the pistol? Well, it takes a little while to start understanding and breaking it down. And then slowly but surely, people start understanding how to attack it. And I think it's kind of the same way when you see Ciryl Gane. He's just, for me, it's movement at the heavyweight division that you just don't see, that type of movement. Right, that type of athleticism. So it's just very different from what we've seen in the past. But I think it's beatable, of course. But I think for right now, yeah, he's probably the best guy that we've seen in quite a while. Next to maybe the Jon Jones moving up in weight, like the nostalgia of what this fight looks like.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because that was actually one thing I was going to mention. The fight I mentioned Derek Lewis because that was the fight we were going to see, but we all got to be honest. The fight we all wanted to see was Francis and Jon Jones. And I'm not saying that fight will never happen. I think we still have that very much, in the playbook, maybe in 2022. But again, I would argue that, based on what we know, Ciryl Gane could arguably be more dangerous than Jon Jones because while Jon Jones going to heavyweight is very interesting, and we know, and I personally consider Jon the greatest mixed martial artist of all time, we still don't know what heavyweight Jon Jones is going to look like. Jon Jones has never been a one-punch knockout kind of guy, against anybody. Ciryl Gane has that ability. We've seen him put guys down with one shot. We've seen him put down with multiple shots. So again, I think an argument can be made that again, Ciryl, even as good as Jon Jones would have been, there is a little bit more of inherent danger with a guy like Ciryl Gane. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that here's a guy who carries this weight naturally in Ciryl Gane. He's a natural heavyweight. We're talking Jon Jones, who's now trying to put weight on to get up to that heavyweight division. And how is that going to look for him when it comes to understanding the body mechanics and the cardio and all those little things when you're really the one time you're going to figure that out is in the cage. I mean, obviously you're going to have sparring and everything else, but for him to figure this out on the fly, for Jon Jones to move up in heavyweight and feel what this the heavyweight power feels like and the movement and all those things, I think it's a tall task for him. So when you look at the guy who's probably best suited for this heavyweight division right now to fight for the title, it's going to be Ciryl Gane, in my opinion. Yeah.
Now your job as coach is to get Francis best prepared for himself and best prepared for Ciryl Gane. We all know, part of the sport is there are outside factors that can influence how a fight goes. I've had this conversation with a lot of fighters, like let's just say when a fighter's going through a divorce. We don't see that. You don't see it in the gym. You don't see it, on the surface. But if you're going to a real emotional time at home, you might be a wreck in the fight. You might be as physically prepared as you've ever been, but you still just can't get into the mode for fighting. Now, a big part of the narrative leading into this fight hasn't been a personal thing between Ciryl and Francis, but Francis and his former head coach, Fernand Lopez. Now, I talked to Fernand 2 days ago. To be clear, he had glowing reviews for you, nothing but great things to say about you and the coach. And actually, great comments about Francis as well. But we know there's history there, and it's kind of between them. We've seen the articles. Francis had a problem with the footage that was released from a training session, and I get it. They worked together for years, and now they're not working. I get it. I understand. But how do you approach that as a coach, knowing that? There is a little bit of a rivalry here between, former head coach and fighter. And you're trying to get him ready for a very dangerous opponent, Ciryl Gane, because we can't ignore it. But I imagine in a way you have to.
Yeah, I just try not to add any more fuel to that. And to be quite fair, Francis doesn't really talk too much about it, to be honest with you. I mean, he hasn't made it part of his narrative. I think he's really zeroed and dialed in on Ciryl Gane and understanding that this is the task at hand. And it's not Ferdinand versus Francis or anything like that. Obviously, it's got a great backstory to it, and you said that you hit it on the head, man. I got nothing but respect for these guys. This man has built a great lineage of fighters out there in France. it's time and time again proven. These guys are fighting at the highest level. I don't really try to bring more to that other than the fact of, yeah, they used to be former coach and training partners, and a little bit of empathy too, man. Like, I feel bad that they don't have that relationship anymore because they did a lot together, and it does kind of suck that that's where it ended and they don't have this like relationship that you would hope that they would, but it is what it is. And I'm really, honestly, Damon, I'm just not trying to add anything more to it other than just business.
Yeah. With that being said, one of the things we talked about with Francis going into the Stipe fight was, you said, just wait and see the tools that Francis has put together. And we talked about the wrestling. I kind of joked when I talked to Francis after the fight. I was like, when are we going to start seeing you throw blast doubles into your repertoire? Francis, he kind of laughed at that one. But is there a part of you that believes this is a fight that will allow Francis to show more of himself? Because while he still will always have that incredible one-punch knockout power where he just has to flick you with his finger and you go down, I feel like Ciryl Gane is the kind of fighter who's going to bring the best out of Francis Ngannou. Like, we will see other elements of his game. Now, again, he could, club him with that right hand in the first round. We never know that. But I feel like this is the kind of fight where it may go in the third round. We may see him take a takedown. We may see him go for submissions. Like, this feels like that kind of dynamic fight.
I think it has to be honest with you, Damon. I don't think you can come in there just thinking, hey, we're going to touch this guy and we're going to put his lights out. Would you be surprised if that happened? No. I mean, he's pound for pound the hardest hitter in the world. But at the end of the day, it's like Ciryl doesn't really get hit all too often. He doesn't get squared up all too often. I haven't seen him really just, get dropped or really wobbled. So banking on the fact that we're going to just find this guy in this chaos and we're going to hit him on the chin and we're going to knock him out, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I think you have to have smart angles and elements on how to get him to feel like, you can create that hands drop or find him to the body or get back upstairs or thread a takedown. You're going to have to blend a lot of this stuff in there because I do think this guy is that good, but I also understand the fact that, like, you're going to have to, you just can't really always rely on the fact that you can knock somebody out just with power. We saw that with Puna. My guy Puna is in there. Every time he goes in there, he's going to knock somebody's head off. Like, hold on. You can jab your way in too, bud. You can do some other things as well. So that's what I'm hoping for that we can see in this fight, that, yeah, you can see Francis tie in a lot of the things that he's been working on.
Yeah. I know as a coach, you don't put one guy or girl above another. You work with your fighters on a personal level. And I also know that there's a lot of great coaches at Xtreme Couture, so I don't want to just single you out. But I look at guys like yourself, a guy like Mark Henry. I know you guys do a lot of research. You put a lot into getting ready for a fight. So I don't want to make it sound like the attention you're paying to Francis is different than, let's say, Kai Kamako just got a huge win, in Bellator. But I know that the intriguing element of this, I talked about it, several times already, what Ciryl Gane brings in the fight and what we know Francis Ngannou brings in the fight. As a coach, do you get excited? The chess element of this, the kind of breaking it down when you're doing your research, like this is one of those kind of like once in a lifetime kind of fights, right?
Man, this thing keeps me up at night, Damon. Like, this is it. This is what you get excited for. And I've understood with my time with Francis that I don't have to overload him with so much information on, like, okay, if he does this, we're going to do that. If he does this, where Francis is a very, very reaction fighter. But my goal is to give him like pathways, if you will. So it's like, hey, if this happens, we have the choice between 1 and 5 things. And it's up to you to read those 1 and 5 things and you decide when you're in there, because at the end of the day, he's the artist. He's the one that's painting the picture. My job is just give him the right paint and allow him to paint the picture that he sees. So, sometimes I've noticed that a lot in the past where, I've been like too much analysis, where I've had to take a step back and be like, okay, for me, it's nice because if a situation does happen, I've problem solved it in my head already because I've seen it, but I don't always have to throw that on the plate for the fighter. I know how to prepare before it happens.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. And I understand, Coach, you're going to be biased because Francis is your guy. I totally understand that. But the reason I'm asking this question is because you as a coach, you have to assess your fighters. You have to know what you're getting into. Like a fighter who I'm a massive, massive fan of who works out of Xtreme Couture is Casey O'Neill. I think Casey is so incredibly talented. I think she could be the future of this division. But if I ask you right now, will Casey O'Neill be the greatest flyweight fighter of all time? You probably couldn't answer that question. We don't know. She hasn't even come close to that ceiling yet. We just don't know. When I ask you and I look at Francis, I know he's technically going into his first title defense, but we've all kind of pegged Francis as the future of this division and a guy who could become the greatest heavyweight of all time because of what he brings, the intangible elements, the physical elements, all the things he brings in. And we know how tough it's been to be a long-reigning champion of heavyweight. I mean, Stipe, who is, universally recognized as probably the greatest UFC heavyweight of all time, 3 title defenses. I mean, that's the bar because it's been so hard. And so I don't want to take this out of context, but when you look at Francis, when you look at his talent, when you look at knowing him so well, like I peg that guy and saying this could be a generational heavyweight. This is a guy who I believe could be long-reigning champion, dominant champion, all the things we talked about. And he has those matchups now. He has Ciryl Gane. He has a potential Stipe trilogy. He has Jon Jones, the kind of fights that will define his legacy. Like when you look at Francis, do you say to yourself, yeah, this is a guy I absolutely could believe a year or two from now we could be saying is the greatest to ever do this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's just, honestly, Damon, I really feel like he's still just scratching the surface on a lot of this stuff. We saw in his last fight with Stipe, just kind of the evolution of his punch selection, like who hits a cross switch lead uppercut and drops a guy with it. Like just things that he was doing that he does in the room, he does in the gym, but that's one thing. But when you're able to do it live and able to see it live, that's when it really starts to take to fruition. You're like, man, this is what this guy's capable of. Same side head kicks, dropping the calf kick, those little elements that you start to see in his game. So that I really feel like he's just scratching the surface and getting to understand who and what he's actually capable of. And that's pretty scary to think because he's already got the belt. Now, we get through Ciryl Gane, and I could see him winning another 4 or 5 in a row, right? And possibly fighting Ciryl Gane 2 or 3 times in our career as well. So, I think that division, that landscape, if Francis is at the top of that, I think he's going to consistently get better over time. And you saw that with Kamaru Usman since he's been champion. I think every time out, he's been getting better and better.
Yeah. Coach, I'm curious, your focus with Francis, and I think everyone's focus with Francis is not only Ciryl Gane, but his mixed martial arts career. But I know Francis has told me, and I'm sure he's told you, his desire at some point, he would love to box. That's how he started. He was in boxing. He originally wanted to be a boxer and then kind of transitioned and became a mixed martial artist. Now, we have seen it recently with all these guys crossing over and doing these kind of things. And the guys who are crossing over typically are, either kind of the tail end of their career, guys who are just out of contract and they're available to do it. So we all got to be real with this. I love Kamaru Usman. I think he's, again, amazing. You won't find a bigger fan of that guy, but there's no way the UFC is going to let him fight Canelo. Come on. We just know, we know that's never going to happen. But hypothetically, when you look at a guy like Francis and you look at the talent this guy has and the power this guy has, like, I feel like he's one of those guys. If he ever did decide and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to do boxing. I'm going to take a couple boxing matches a couple years down the road. That's a guy that I'm like, you know what? I'd have faith that he actually could go out there and do that. Like, I don't know. Will he beat Tyson Fury? I can't say that, but could he compete at a high level? I really believe he could.
I watched him spar Joe Joyce, a couple camps ago. We went down to a boxing gym and I watched him spar, and he did a great job with Joe Joyce, who's a top heavyweight boxer, So I think he's capable of doing anything that he puts his mind to. And if that's something that he wants to do, for me, I feel like it's something that, like, it's one of those bucket list things that he's got to do. He's got to get that done because that's something he set out to do years ago. So at some point, you're definitely going to see Francis boxing, I think. But, when that's going to happen, I don't know. And I know right now his main focus is on Ciryl Gane and not worried about much else than that.
Yeah. Shifting attention a little bit, Coach, one thing I wanted to ask you about was, a big subject that's come up this past, let's say, few months has been, coaching in the corner, what you do in the corner with your fighters. And I know you've seen on Twitter, I always compliment your cornering. I think you do a tremendous job of your cornering. There was a bit of a controversy a couple of months ago. I'm sure you saw it with Aspen Ladd and her fight when her coach was kind of yelling at her and kind of, people believe she was being berated. And Aspen has come out and said, listen, if I was a guy, no one would have said a word. And I talked to James Krause, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And he kind of said the same thing. He's like, if that was a guy, no one would have cared because, but one thing James told me, and this is the question I have for you. James told me that, he approaches every fighter individually with how they want to be cornered. Not the way he corners one guy is not how he would corner a different girl, how he would corner a different guy. Everybody's got their own way that they need to be talked to. And I've always complimented your cornering because I believe it's an underrated aspect of this game that is really important. We've seen fights change completely based on the advice given in a corner between rounds. I'm curious your approach to that, and not just with Francis, but just with all your fighters. How do you deal? Like, is it an individual thing? Do you talk to him ahead of time and say, hey, how do you want me to talk to you in the corner? Because I always think you do a tremendous job. So I'm curious how you handle that.
Yeah, thank you first and foremost, and that's where I feel most at home. I feel most at home in that 1 minute. I like the fact that like we can come up with an adjustment, we can come up with some motivation, whatever it may be to get the job done. But for me, Damon, I really feel like you really have to understand and know your fighter and what their needs are. And James asking the question, or whether you're around them enough and like in practice, if you try to yell at them and they don't really respond with the yelling, but if you go and coddle them, I think it just takes that time really, and understanding what they need to hear and who they are. Dan Ige, he's different. I know what I can say to Dan and how I can get him to respond versus, you might be talking to somebody else in the corner and you might have to be a little bit easier on them. If you listen to some of the stuff I say to Kai Kamaka in the corner, they'd be calling for my head too. Like I've gone off on him a few times, but I know Jim West a long, long time. He's a talented coach. If anybody in the world knows Aspen Ladd better, it's Jim. And he's done that before. I've heard him yell at her in the corner, and I believe it was against Yana Kunitskaya, and she went out and knocked out Yana. And he got all the praise in the world because the aftermath was a win. But had that not, in their last fight, it didn't go that way. And then he gets criticized for being rough and tough with her. So I don't know, man. I kind of side with James on that one, and Jim as well. I think Jim was just doing what he had to do to get his fighter to respond. We might not have understood that from outsiders looking in, but I always give that a little bit of grain of salt because if anybody knows her, man, it's him. So, it's tough. It's a tough situation to be in for sure, but I thought he was doing the right thing.
Yeah, there's no perfect right or wrong answer. I think that's really the key with coaching. You got to know your fighters. Like I said, there's certain guys and girls for that matter who are coaches. Like I look at you and I say this to you honestly, and I said this to James as well. I said, there's a couple of people in this sport I look at, like I want to see the corner because I'm so fascinated by the way you work with your fighters. And you and James Krause are probably my two favorites because the way you talk to your fighters, not only through motivation, but all through technique. And I've seen time and time again the changes. And so your fighters. And so again, who knows? I mean, what one fighter needs is not what another fighter needs. You know what I mean? And I'm sure you know that. Like what you need to tell Francis in the corner may not be what you need to tell Kai Kamaka in the corner. They're not the same fighter. It's not one size fits all.
100%. Now, for me, like I played quarterback. And the best part about playing quarterback in football was, my dad always told me that. He goes, you can't grab all 10 players by their face mask. You're going to have to speak to some differently. They're not going to respond the same way. And every time out, you might have to coddle a guy. You might have to yell at somebody, So that at an early age, I learned how to communicate better with people, right? Like it just taught you that, like, not everybody's going to respond the same way just because your hair's on fire and you're yelling at them, in a high pressure situation as well. So yeah, I think the right tool for the job when it comes to advice in the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick before I get you out of here, Coach, of course, a big reason why we're talking is the massive heavyweight title fight coming up in January, Francis Ngannou, but I don't want to discount all the other guys and girls you're working with in the gym. You're always so busy. I always see you on Instagram. You're always training. Like I said, I joked with you about training on Christmas, but I feel like you kind of have like an attached garage to the gym where you just kind of walk in there, 8 times a day. But kind of give me a sense of some other people at Xtreme Couture we should be keeping an eye on. I know I mentioned Kai Kamaka. Of course, your guy Puna is coming back. I had a chance to talked to him a couple of months ago, and he told me about like the changes and the differences he's made since his loss coming back. Of course, Dan Ige, I mentioned Casey O'Neill. Who else are you working with in the gym that we need to be keeping an eye out on as we go into 2022?
Well, we got Sean Strickland coming up as well. He'll be fighting Jack Hermanson in the main event. I believe that's February 5th, if I remember correctly. Then we have a lot of young up and comers coming into the gym right now they're pro debut guys. Couple fights in that their fight should be coming up here soon. But really, those young kids in the gym are that ecosystem, if you will, the ones that are like pushing the pros. And really, really making the gym a lot stronger, in my opinion, because like these guys are coming in with piss and vinegar, making the room a lot tougher. It's great to have Max Roshkoff back in the gym because he's now 2-0, I think, since his comeback in Cage Warriors. He's a talent, man, and I feel bad that the UFC didn't work out for him the way it did, but sometimes things happen for a reason. And I firmly believe we'll see Max back at the highest level at some point competing, because he's doing that in the room day in and day out. And now he's back with Cage Warriors, and he's got 2 wins under his belt with that as well. So, but yeah, definitely Sean Strickland, man. That guy's a nut. I love working with him. He's got a big fight coming up soon too. And that's really it. I think for the most part, everybody's been in the room just training and grinding during the holidays, helping out.
Let me ask you about Sean. I go back a long ways with Sean. I know Sean will be the first person to tell you his opinion on the media, which is always funny to me, but I've always had a great relationship with Sean. We've had some crazy, wild, insane interviews over the years. And anyone that says, Sean Strickland is not the guy, he's putting on an act, he's not putting on an act. Sean Strickland is 100% that guy. But we've heard the wild story because Sean's not afraid to talk about the training room. He was just talking the other day about a situation when he trained with Tony Ferguson and Raymond Daniels. Like, he's not afraid to talk. And we know that he's a bit of a wild man. How is it working with Sean? Because I know he is a tremendous athlete, one of the best middleweights in the world, but he's not afraid to, he talks about going for it in training and really, when it gets sparring, gets kind of wild. How is it working with him?
I love it. I love working with him. And it just reminds me of the old school days at Xtreme Couture, to be honest with you, when, you have Mike Pyle and Jay and these guys get in on a sparring day. They didn't give a shit who you were and if you were friends. They're trying to fight you every day. And that was the vibe. And of course we went away from that because it wasn't great for the longevity of your career. But there's an element to that I do like, and a tenacity that I think is important. You want to have competition in the training room. Now, Sean's delivery is never the best. He doesn't deliver things nicely to people, but when you really boil things down, the way Sean talks to some of his teammates or some of the people in the room, it's really because he cares and he wants to get the best out of you. And I know it sounds weird to say, but a lot of times, he'll ride certain fighters in the gym, and he's riding them because he sees more potential out of them than they're giving themselves. So understanding that Sean Strickland, he's going to tell you that how he feels. He's going to be real all the time. I think it's kind of a breath of fresh air because in this day and age, you don't get that a lot,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know people who train with him, they like training with him. They talk about that intensity he brings in that you don't always get in the gym. And I get it. You're not always going to be able to go 110% every single day. You'll burn out. I understand that. But I've talked to people who've worked with him and they like working with him. They say he's a great teammate. He's just unconventional, I guess is the best way to say it.
Well, we sat down we kind of just sat down and went over some ground rules on, hey, this is the standard for the gym and the team. We're going to let you be you, but you have to meet this standard and follow our rules as well. And we're not going to butt any heads. And he's been great. He's been absolutely great since then. It's funny because him and Brad Tavares will spar 1 round every sparring day, and Brad will only give him 1 round. He goes, that's it. That's how we remain friends. If we spar more than 1 round, we're going to fight and we're going to hate each other. So you get 1 round and that's it. We're done. Go move it on to somebody else. But that dude will literally spar anybody in our gym. He calls Francis out every sparring session. He loves to spar Francis because he goes, I want to feel as close to death as possible. And I want to have that fear of God in my heart every time I spar a guy like Francis Ngannou. So we sure throw him in there and let him get some rounds with Francis. And I watched him and Roy Nelson go after it last week. Those two try to knock each other's heads off. But here's Sean Strickland, big old smile ear to ear.
It's funny you say that. I remember I was down at American Top Team a couple years ago, and I got to see Dustin Poirier and Jorge Masvidal in a sparring session. A lot of fun, and they were going for it, man. And there was a couple of moments where I was like, "Oh man, that sounded really bad." And it was over there, as close as you can get for teammates and friends on a team. But it was a blast to watch that. So I got to be honest, what's it like watching Francis and Sean Strickland spar?
You're just you feel like at any moment, Francis could just go and just put his lights out when he wants to. But, Francis, to his credit, has done a really good job of keeping his sparring partners intact. That's been the challenge a lot of times when you have Francis in your gym, is keeping guys alive and around that can give him the rounds that he needs. So I usually have hey, don't break your toys, and I'll tell him and he'll ease off or whatever. But the rounds between him and Sean are actually very competitive. Sean gets in there and gets after it. And Francis will entertain him, if you will, and not try to knock him out. But yeah, there's some great rounds, and credit to Sean, man. Not everybody's chomping at the bit to hop in the cage with Francis.
I love that he calls him out and wants to do it though. That's crazy. I love that. That's Sean Strickland. If you don't know Sean Strickland, that is Sean Strickland right there.
What to a T, man. You know, he wants to compete, and he wants to compete against the best in the room. And if there's somebody better than him in the room, he's going to ask for that round. He wants to compete, and he wants to try to, see where he needs to get better himself. So you got to give him credit.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Coach, I always appreciate taking the time. We talked earlier about all the different weapons you had to Francis. I forgot to mention, Francis does these body shot challenges with guys, which always cracks me up. And listen, to me, Francis Ngannou is the scariest fighter ever. Like, that's the guy I would least want to take a punch from. But you mentioned earlier, he's added a calf kick into his repertoire. Now, can I go ahead and say I do not sign up to ever take a calf kick from Francis Ngannou, because that looks like the least fun ever.
Man, it's the word. He put me out of commission. It was a couple of weeks ago. We had our cardio sessions, and he was starting to kick the pad, and like we're hitting this leg kicks for reps, and I could feel like the padding starting to like move, like separate. Like the padding got scared. Like the padding was like moving away on me, and it was like we had like 5 more reps to go, and I'm counting in my head. And I'm like, oh my god, this pad is moving, and I'm gonna get kicked like full speed in the leg, and sure as shit. Bam! It was all shin bone right across my leg, man. And he was like, "That one hurt, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah, dude, that one got me good." So yeah, we've been adding little things more to the game, but man, I'll tell you what, we got to get some better equipment because this shit's failing me. I won't be able to walk right for a week.
Yeah, like I said, I will not. There's a lot of things I don't want to get hit with by Francis Ngannou. That might be near the top of the list now, because the idea of him calf kicking me sounds like the least fun ever.
It's the worst, man.
Well, Coach, I always appreciate taking the time. Have a good rest of your training camp. Please wish best of luck to Francis for me, and thank you as always for taking the time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, David. Thanks for having me, brother.